Hello and welcome everybody to Workday's Level Up series on product accessibility. Workday is a global Fortune 500 company who provides software as a service for businesses to manage their people and their resources. My name is Mary Rumley. I am the Director of Product Accessibility here at Workday. We also have a disability inclusion team that focuses on accessibility for our people and our workplaces. Today we've got a fantastic panel to talk to you about product accessibility, offering 3 different perspectives, both from sales, our product engineering teams, and legal. So we'll dive straight into introductions. We have Michael Blunden here from sales, Katie Holden from product engineering, and Rich Sauer from legal. So let's get started with our first question. Michael, you're up first. Can you tell us a little bit about why you care about accessibility?
Yeah, thanks, Mary. I think beyond the moral and ethical obligation, I think we can have a tremendous economic impact. If you think about Workday's customer base, we serve over 11,000 customers. We've got over 60% of the Fortune 500 as customers as well. And making sure that that technology that manages your people and your money can make that workforce more productive and more efficient, I think that's a tremendous impact that we can have as an organization.
Great. And so, Rich, how about you? Why do you care about accessibility?
Well, in part, it's sort of my job to some extent to care. I mean, I run the legal department here at Workday, and being compliant, being up to date on regulation, and doing what we need to do to stay on the right side of the law is certainly part of it. But that's probably a small part of the motivation. I'd say the second big piece for me is just as a workmate. I mean, I think it's core to our values as a company. It's core to our values of what we do to support our customers, what we do to support our workmates. As you said at the beginning, we've got a great team here within the company that looks after all of our workmates and thinks hard about the disability and accessibility issues here at the company. And then just from a personal standpoint, I mean, I'm sort of blessed to come from a family that has a lot of longevity. I'm actually going off to Wisconsin next week to see my mom, who is 98 years old. There's a lot of things that you can do in the disability area that you do to support people with disabilities, but many of us are going to take advantage of those things as we ourselves age or have an accident or an injury. And I just have seen some of the mobility issues my mother's had, and just some of the advantages that she's been able to leverage as a result of accessible buildings and facilities and things like that. So that's where it feels a little more personal to me.
That's great. And Katie, how about you?
Well, I think, as you mentioned, Mary, my role at Workday is leading our product development organization, and specifically I run the platform team that powers the entire product suite. So HR, finance, all of it is run by my team's technology engine. So I feel a deep responsibility to ensure that that engine, that foundation, is accessible by default, right? That every single part of the product area, we have it built in end to end. But at a more personal level, I actually had some exposure when I was in university. So I studied electrical and computer engineering, which is a pretty kind of mathematical discipline. And I was looking for something to sort of lighten up and activate this other part of my brain. And so I ended up, through a friend's recommendation, taking American Sign Language, ASL, for 3 semesters, actually. And it was this perfect opportunity to be expressive with language. And for anyone who's been close to ASL before, it was certainly my first experience. It is a beautiful language where you use your body. You literally even use eye movements to do tenses. Mm-hmm. And it was just very eye-opening for me to get to be part of that community for the 3 semesters. Loved going to the events, beginner's mindset. And actually, to this day, I still use a lot of the things I learned in now public speaking, right? Where things about expressive hand communication or even simple things like lighting up your eyes can really change how people interpret the meaning. And I credit that thanks to my time with, in that case, the deaf community. So yeah, it was just a wonderful experience, and now something I get to put to practice at Workday.
Oh, it's great to hear that. Actually, I have a little anecdote myself. So my oldest daughter is taking ASL at college, and she has never been very good at languages. She has dyslexia. And so she said, oh, now I understand what people feel like when they speak a foreign language. I can really understand this. So it really resonated with her ASL, which is fun to hear. Okay, so we'll stay with you, Katie. Let's talk about product accessibility and why it's important to Workday.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I touched a little bit on my role within Workday. But even beyond that, Workday serves a huge amount of the corporate world, over 10,500 organizations live and running, 65 million users under contract. And so I feel a level of responsibility to ensure, and our customers certainly expect, that our product is accessible for every type of user within their organization, right? We have a vast set of geographies, users with different abilities, folks who engage with technology in different ways. And so if our product suite is not up to par, we really wouldn't be successful in getting into these markets and categories that we so want to be the innovative leader in. It's very foundational to what we do. I can't think of a single customer I've talked to in a customer meeting that doesn't have passionate leadership on this topic. Workday literally manages pay, career growth, opportunities, benefits. I mean, these are the types of foundations that absolutely need to be available to everyone so that we can have those rich career growth conversations and really, have the customers that use us thrive.
Yeah, we actually had a customer tell us once that this was the first time that they were able to actually view their own pay stub without anybody else giving them some assistance. So that's how impactful we're being here with the product. Okay, Rich, over to you. What's your perspective?
It's sort of hard to say it any better than what Katie just said. Maybe I'll build on that. I do think what Katie's describing to me, it sort of all ladders up to some extent as we have customers that have tremendous trust in us as a key mission critical vendor to them. And accessibility has an absolute seat at the table in that equation. When they think about that, it is a topic that they think a ton about. I think about it from a legal standpoint. I think about what the regulations and the rules are, and we definitely work hard to make sure that we're compliant. But sort of building on what Katie said, it does come down to our customers really more than the laws. We do things that go beyond the law because our customers demand it. Sometimes they demand it and they actually build it into their contract terms and conditions. And so we have to live up to that promise as well. So that's kind of how I think about it and why it's so important to the company.
Yeah. And Michael, how about from a sales perspective? Where do you see it?
So from a sales lens, it's really about unlocking doors. I think what we're seeing now is a lot of organizations do require it from a compliance standpoint. And over the last 2 years, what we've really seen is it's kind of shifted from being a nice to have to being absolutely mandatory. So a lot of jurisdictions within which we work have laws in place where you need to have certain things be a part of your bid. And so from an accessibility standpoint, that's what we've seen in RFPs or competitive bids over the last few years is really that need to meet certain mandatory requirements. And so for us, from a sales perspective, is having the knowledge that Workday leads the market in some of these things is comforting to know that we can not only meet those requirements, but oftentimes surpass as well.
Right. And Rich, can you talk a little bit about how accessibility shows up specifically in your area in the legal space?
Yeah, well, to be honest, the thing where it shows up for me probably loudest and strongest is I am actually the executive sponsor for the People with Disabilities Employee Belonging Council within Workday. It's an amazing organization, amazing group of people. It's both people with disabilities, people who are allies or supporters of people with disabilities join this organization. And I will tell you, this is an incredible advocacy group. We meet every month. We spend time together with the leadership of that organization. And they just spend a lot of time talking to us, not only about, things that we should be doing in the product differently, things we should be doing as a company differently, and just really pushing us hard and kind of keeping us honest and keeping us true to our word. So just grateful for all that community does for the company.
Great, thank you. And what about you, Michael?
Yeah, and again, from a sales perspective, with the conversations that we're having in the marketplace today, we often speak to different types of executive leaders, CHROs and CFOs quite often. And part of the common theme that we keep hearing from those people is how can we more effectively manage our people and our money? And so when you think about the subset of your population and the workforce that you have within, if certain folks within there have a need for accessible technologies, and sometimes we're seeing 15 to 25% of the population require accessible technology, you want to make sure that your entire workforce can work productively and efficiently. And I think that's what I meant earlier when I talked about unlocking doors and having a seat at the table, is Workday allows all employees to work both effectively and productively. And I think that's what we're hearing from CHROs and CFOs in the marketplace today.
Yeah, it's a great point.
And I agree. I think it's a great point because I do think it's sort of, in some ways, it's a definition writ large of inclusion. But it's sort of, making sure that you're getting the absolute, creating an environment where people can be their absolute best selves, regardless of their capabilities. But again, I mean, so much of this technology is going to be beneficial with people with disabilities, but it's going to benefit so many other people in the workforce as well. Just because, things around, being able to enlarge text, being able to, read things easier. I mean, it's amazing what it can unlock.
Yeah, and one of Workday's core values is its employees, its workmates, of course, and we want them to show up their whole selves. So making sure that we can provide tools so that they can be productive as their whole selves is really important to us.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And Katie, how about your area?
Yeah, so again, as a product development leader, for me, accessibility is something that we're trying to bake into the foundations of what we do. I think all too commonly, especially with technology SaaS vendors, accessibility can be an afterthought, right? It's a checkbox that you're trying to do at the end of a product development process. And at Workday, we've really tried to flip that around, right? We see it as the stable foundation that we then can build all features on, right? So in the same way we think about product resiliency, product security, right? These key foundations that the enterprise buyer looks to us for, accessibility is right there. In practical terms, what this often looks like is engineering, product management, and design teams partnering. And as we're designing a feature and putting pixels to a page, we're also engaging with your accessibility team, Mary, to ensure that the patterns we're creating, the different user experiences will indeed be accessible for users with all different ways they're going to interact with the product. So whether that's screen readers or keyboard navigation controls, right? It's easy for product teams to sort of dream up interfaces. And when you really take a step back, exactly to the point you were saying, Rich, we get some input from the accessibility team to ensure that we could actually make it accessible or keyboard navigable. Those are things that folks of all user types use, by the sort of creative constraint of understanding how to make our products usable by everyone, in turn, actually makes the products more usable for the entire population. And I just think that's a lesson we've seen again and again. I don't want to make us sound perfect because this whole group knows it has been a journey for Workday. I'll just give you one concrete example. So we have a huge product suite, HR and finance. Well, a couple years ago, we were looking at one of the top trafficked parts of Workday. It's the organization chart, right? So it's where you can see the org chart, everyone's reporting relationships. This is a top real estate for us. In workforce management, it's number 2 by user traffic. It's about 6 million monthly active users that are touching this. And believe it or not, there were things we had to work on to really raise and differentiate the bar. It was definitely accessible enough, but as we go into new markets, new territories, and again, as our customers challenge us and co-create with us, there were some things there, right? Fixing color contrast ratios, so it's a bit more readable, right? For people with different sets of vision. Again, keyboard nav and screen readers, there were a few set of things here. So we literally rewrote the org chart. We added some new features to it too, which was delightful for all of our other customers. And so I just bring it up as an example to say, we work really hard at this, but it is a journey and we're not perfect. And we're constantly working across legal, product, and sales to make sure, and of course our customers, to make sure that we're elevating all the experiences that we need and leading in this way.
Yeah. Well said. And, talking about leadership and strategy, if we think about our Workday strategy, how does accessibility help with that?
Yeah, I think, again, with strategic initiatives, it's easy for things like accessibility to be an afterthought. I can tell you that's not the case. I'll just give one example from a strategic initiative I'm currently involved in. One part of my job is leading artificial intelligence or AI and integrating that into Workday's experience. And again, with innovation, it can be tempting to think, well, this is innovation. We're going to get to all that hard stuff like security and accessibility later. But thanks to the advocacy, the education your team has provided, we're really thinking about it right up front. So a concrete example is probably the biggest, if not the second biggest initiative we have right now is conversational user experience, right? So it's the idea that when using our HR and finance products, you can engage with the software just as if you're having a conversation with each other. It's really powerful, especially for folks who don't necessarily know the right terminology or don't know exactly where to find that one task name. Conversational user experience is AI powered, but it's actually brilliant when thought through the lens of accessibility too, right? Because the ability to engage with the system through a conversation really unblocks a lot of the complexity of enterprise software and has huge opportunity.
Well, it reduces a lot of the friction, right?
Yes, and the cognitive load, I mean, it's just, again, a great example of when we take the innovation and we take our global population of users in mind, we really drive that better outcome and bigger innovation. So I think that's at least one strategic example from my area where accessibility is playing a big role right out of the gates.
What I love about that, because where I come from, one of the things I hate to do, in case you have to do it, but you show up at an engineer's door and you say, "Oh, the law's changed, or there's this legal requirement. You ship this product, or you're 8 months into the development cycle, but I've got something you've got to do differently now because there's this thing you got to require." And it's like, oh, it's kind of a hot fix that has to be done. But the fact that we do this, we build it in from the ground up, it's part of the design process at the beginning, this just makes my life so much easier, and it doesn't make me an enemy of people like Katie when I show up at their door with news. But that's great. And that's not, I mean, as you said, it's not always been the case here. It's a journey. And I think I've been in the technology industry for over 20 years, and I remember the days when, the way you did a development project is you lined up all your resources on one side of the ledger, and we've got this many people and this many hours, and then you put all the features and functionality and everything else that you wanted to build into the next rev of the product on the other side, and then you started to match across how many people for that feature, how many people for that feature. And the accessibility features always fell, but there was always more features and functionality than you had people.
Sure. Yeah.
And the accessibility would always fall below the line. Well, we'll do it the next rev. But I think that's changed for the industry more broadly. But it's definitely great to hear that that's been changed and long changed here.
Yeah, thank you. And strategy and sales, how does accessibility fit into that?
Yeah. Well, you kind of heard both Katie and Rich talking about how we've got 65 million people under contract with Workday today, over 60% of the Fortune 500. So you think about what are the key areas that Workday can grow in moving forward. Well, that happens to be oftentimes regulated industries. So that's where a lot of the growth is happening right now for Workday. And that's where that strategy and accessibility line up together. So specifically around the federal government both in the US and in Canada, so the North American territory, where both markets have specific requirements around accessibility. And so part of what we were saying earlier about having a seat at the table is knowing that we place accessibility high up on our internal strategies, and having it be part of the way that we foundationally build our technology allows us to not just be confident when we're speaking to the federal government, but know that we are leading the market in some of these areas. And so for us to have those two things really shows that we align our strategy and how we go to market with the federal governments.
Great. Thank you. So it's not all easy. There's challenges out there. So the next question is around, what are the challenging areas that you find in accessibility? And perhaps I can kick us off. So our journey, as we've talked about with product accessibility, is ongoing. And we're about 5 years into the journey. And I will say that at the beginning, it was tough. We had to spend time making sure that we were talking about accessibility, that we were educating people about product accessibility. It was not easy. But now sort of like 5 years on, and we were very fortunate and lucky at the beginning that we had senior executive sponsorship and support. And so now we're at the place where we can have the grace to decide what to focus on rather than focus on everything. And so that's certainly been a challenge in the past for me and my team, but we're now able to really focus in and refine where we're spending our time. So Katie, what do you find most challenging in your role?
It really has been a journey, and even Mary, for you and I as two leaders of our functions, we've been finding the way to make our teams work together on a rolling basis, right? But if I go back to the very beginning of when I recently took on this position, what was challenging for me initially was you want to learn it all, or at least for me, I want to understand the landscape. And the accessibility landscape is not trivial, right? There are regulations. There are different types of users to understand. And for people who are technologists listening in, you can appreciate the complexity of making products work with all the different types of assistive technologies, different vision requirements. So it can be pretty overwhelming. And I'll say as a leader, maybe the biggest challenge can be finding a way to not let that paralyze you, right? Because the reality is you could spend years, if not PhDs, there are PhDs who focus entirely on the accessibility space, but we're business leaders and we have to understand the high level, and then you have to pick something to start. And so I think going from that shift from understanding the space and the big picture, so you know where to focus, but then getting the flywheel going is a challenge I know that we faced here at Workday, although we have a pretty good system going nowadays. And I think it's something, again, I hear commonly from technology leaders I meet with, where just absorbing the information and then getting over the hump and starting and getting the rhythm going.
Yeah, no, that's great. And Rich, legal land, challenges there?
In some ways, it's probably similar, but maybe just from a different lens, which is like, for me, it's trying to stay ahead. The environment is changing. It's changing fast. There's a lot of new regulations coming. There's a European Accessibility Act that is something we need to contend with. So there's a little bit of keeping up to date on what's happening. But that's often not helpful because the product development cycles take a long time, and you can't show up at the door with the news like, oh, this just passed yesterday. So then you're trying to forecast, like, well, what's trending? Where are things going? Where should we focus on? Because as Katie said, you can't do it all. You have to focus on what's the top priorities. And then sort of building on what Michael said, then you've got customers, and you have particularly public sector customers are sort of using the power of their pocketbook to drive change. In addition to the legal regulations and the laws, they're also just using their buying power to say, well, we don't care. This is what we want to see. If you want to be if you want to come to the party and bid, you need to be able to meet this bar. So just trying to understand what's happening in all the markets around the world. And you always sort of hope that laws will harmonize. They never do. So that's really the biggest challenge that I think we're dealing with in the legal team.
Yeah, and I think it's very easy in that space to talk in a very black and white way. And this is a very nuanced space to accessibility.
Yeah,
one
absolutely.
person's experience with accessibility is not the same as another person's. So
I think that's
always a challenge.
absolutely right.
Yeah. And how about sales?
Yeah, what to add that these folks didn't add already, but I think you both nailed it on the head when you talk about education and just the shifting landscape that is beneath us right now. Picture any government out there that's trying to understand how fast technology moves, right? And when they're coming up with legislation themselves, it's very black and white, and it's made at a certain point in time. And meanwhile, you've got technology vendors, including Workday, that are changing at the pace of innovation that we are. And so from a sales perspective, we've got to be that bridge between the accessibility team, the product team, the legal team, bringing all those concerns together and voicing that to the public sector entity and getting them to understand the pace of innovation at which we're working. And it's very much moving targets. And so I think education along that journey is crucial, both for us and for the customer.
Yeah. So to pull that thread a little bit, what are you hearing from our prospects and customers around accessibility? And maybe an example of where accessibility has been a maker or a breaker in the deal cycle.
Yeah, excellent question. I think what we've been hearing, and going back to what we all talked about earlier, is it's table stakes now, right? And Rich talked about it. Customers using their buying power to make sure that they've got certain terms and conditions that they want us to agree to. And so if we want to have a seat at the table, we've got to start from that point. And so in one particular instance, we did work with a federal government, and we had to talk to them about some of their terms and conditions and how that aligned with Workday's technology. And it was a 2-year-long process where we had to show them all the good work that we're doing internally, from product, from legal, from the accessibility team, and how that compares to the marketplace and how that fits into their mold of terms and conditions. And so that was a 2-year process of trying to find a happy medium between all of those things together. And I'm happy to say that we got there.
Yeah, I think we often find that once we can get in a room and sit with the accessibility teams in the various prospect spaces, it's a much easier conversation.
I agree.
And we really do embrace that whole journey from prospect to trusted customer or trusted partner. Yeah, great. Katie, you talked a little bit earlier about the sort of overwhelming nature of how much work there is to be done in this space. So as you are a senior leader leading a large team, how do you continue to inspire a large team to focus on accessibility?
Yeah, this is a great question. So just as context, I have team members, product and engineering in 5 different Workday development locations. So we have US, we have Canada, I have European employees. And so it is hard to fit more information in all of their heads, right? And this is a challenge regardless of accessibility or any other topic. But that doesn't mean that we haven't tried. And in fact, we have one key advantage that we got from the very beginning. Not sure if everyone on the panel even knows this, but actually the first incarnation of your group was in my group, UI platform. It started there, and it makes sense because as you remember, we talked about how my team builds accessibility into the product by default. And so having that group can advocate for and manually help us hands-on test and bring in end users was just the perfect pairing to start. Of course, as Workday's grown, as the organization's grown, you've now graduated into a beautiful group, Mary, doing a lot more than just that. And of course, UI platform's grown too. So we had this advantage because accessibility has already been in our foundational DNA. But it's still been a challenge. And I think a lot of it is us taking your content and making sure everyone is aware and educated. Another trick, though, that I've used and I've learned is it's really not all on you as a leader, right? You're gonna cripple yourself if you hold every priority. In fact, as I'm talking to my teammates around the globe, there are absolutely champions who are really fired up about this topic, right? They might have a personal example, something in their past. Maybe it's just the moral imperative that products should be accessible by default. And so I lean on them to help carry the torch and share the stories and the message in all the places, just to kind of keep accessibility alive. Last part you asked us about trade-offs, and I will say this is a canonical challenge, right? There are so many feature requests coming from customers. We're trying to grow in all these new markets and territories. And so the way that I've basically come to, and this is after years of working together on this topic, is a portfolio management approach, right? So if you think about however many engineering resources we have, I have an opportunity to basically set percentage of where we're going to invest those resources. And so a certain percent we're going to invest in net new market growth. A certain percent we're going to invest in security or resiliency, globalization. And literally, I have and manage a percent at my level of this is how much I want to see on accessibility in any given release. And the key is it can never be zero. Certainly not for a company like Workday. It will never be zero. So it's always somewhere, on a lower end of release, 5 to 10%, higher end could be 20 or 30. It really depends on all the other business context. But what it does is it gives me a lever to work with all the other leaders in the business and to take inputs. And it always means accessibility is on the map with a seat at the table at every single release we're going to prioritize, right? And that's really let you and I build this flywheel together with our teams where we can then empower them to say, we know this is coming. Let's bring all of the top priorities you're hearing from the market, from sales. Let's bring my team the areas we're already going to be investing in. And sometimes we'll even get lucky where there'll be a bit of overlap of things we're already built. So it's been very helpful, portfolio management, just to keep it top of mind constantly.
Okay, great. So Rich, over to you. You've been a long-time advocate for accessibility, both in the role you have here at Workday, but also in previous companies. And you are our executive sponsor for our Employee Belonging Council for People with Disabilities. So can you tell us a little bit about that group?
Sure. The People with Disabilities, the EVC, is a group of it's both allies, it's people with disabilities, allies of people with disabilities, people just have an interest. I mean, I essentially, I am sort of honored and privileged to serve as their executive sponsor. I was asked by Mike Franzen, who was a leader here for a long, long time, who was in that role before he retired. And when he decided to step down from the company, he thought long and hard about who might be a good replacement. And he came to me and talked to me about it. And I came to you, Mary, and you convinced me. And for me, it's been an incredible journey. And the thing that I think attracted me to it the most was just the opportunity to learn. I mean, to just sit down, learn. It was an area that I've had some experience in, but I don't have vast experience in. And just to have your eyes open to so many different issues, and then sometimes, just heart-wrenching struggles that people have had to deal with, has been, I think, just a very, very, rich development experience for me personally. But the community itself, it essentially is an advocacy group within the company. And it sort of built on what Katie said, which is, if you're out there and you're trying to get started, you'd be surprised at how many people within your organization have personal passion for this topic and will get involved, and they'll they'll add it on to their day job. They'll make extra time for it to make it successful, and that's what this group does. But I think the thing that they're probably is most powerful about them is they're a voice within the company that, and serving as the exec sponsor, they channel it up so we can be heard. And that's kind of what they want. They don't want us to be perfect. They know we will never be perfect, but they just want to be heard. They want us to be thoughtful. They want us to be aware of the issues and do our level best to try and address them as much as we can.
Yeah. This has been a great conversation today, everybody. I think maybe if we can talk about one thing that you would like the audience to take away from today, and perhaps I'll start. I think the one thing that I would want people to know is to just start the conversation. You never know where your advocates and your friends and your allies are, but if you just start, try not to boil the ocean, just start with one thing and move forward. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised at the community that's out there and the support that you get. How about you, Michael?
Yeah, I think, and again, just coming from that sales perspective, I think one of the biggest things for us has been to be vocal. Be vocal about the good work that's taking place, knowing that accessibility is built in from the ground up, from scratch, knowing about our legal positioning on these things and how the Ally Group, the accessibility team at Workday has started from scratch and built to what it is now. Those are things that I can take into the marketplace and be very vocal and proud about when speaking to a customer, so that when they share their requirements with me, then we come to kind of that level playing field on what their expectations are. And then once they realize the good work that we're doing, often gives them comfort in knowing that Workday is a partner that not only does what they say, but we actually back it up as well.
Yeah.
So I think for any workmates that might be watching this, is really important to just know that we are leading the market in stuff like this, and it's important to be vocal about it, I think.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah.
And how about you, Rich? What would your one takeaway?
I probably would say, this is an area where I think sometimes people are a little nervous about getting involved, maybe saying the wrong thing, maybe not having a deep understanding, and so they feel like they might make a mistake, and so I think the instinct tends to be like, well, I'll just pull back, or I'll just be reticent. And I would say, be curious, be inquisitive, ask questions, get involved, don't be afraid. That's been my personal experience. There's a ton to learn in the space, and just, I think, building on what you said, Mary, just get started. Just take it, pick an area. Don't boil the ocean. Just get started. Don't be afraid to dive in.
Yeah, no, that's great. And Katie, bring us home. What would be your one thing?
I think my one takeaway after being in the space for a while is it's so much more than compliance. And indeed, compliance is part of it, but I'm trying to motivate and galvanize lots of people to get behind these things. And while compliance is part of it, the lesson we've learned again and again at Workday, and I know the accessibility community has felt this too, is when we do something to make our products more accessible, everyone benefits, right? I think lots of times you'll hear the example of a curb cut in the accessibility community, which is the ramped sidewalks if you have different mobility needs to get up and down sidewalks. And then, of course, one of us breaks our leg over Christmas or, and now, thank goodness, you've got this curb cut. And we see the same thing with our Workday products, right? So there is a compliance element, but when we make the products more accessible, it actually just improves the user experience for everyone who uses Workday. And I personally, that's something I can get behind. I find it very motivating.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Katie. And thank you, panel. This has been a great conversation today, and we're going to wrap it up. So everybody following along, thank you for listening in. Please be sure to sign up for the Workday Monthly Level Up series on product accessibility. There's a little bit of something for everybody out there, so we look forward to seeing you there.